In this edition of FSW Conversations on AT, we are talking to Mario Lang. Mario is a global technology and supply chain leader with over 20 years of experience driving digital transformation and innovation for iconic brands like Hugo Boss, Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, Tom Ford, and Balmain Beauty. Known for aligning cutting-edge tech, Mario has led global initiatives that enhance customer experiences, optimize value chains, and future-proof operations across retail, marketing, and e-commerce. Thank you so much, Mario, for your time today. And just to start off with, I would love to know your perspective on digital innovation. How do you see digital innovation shaping the luxury customer experience in the next few years?
Hey, Jessica, Bryce, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation. Really interesting question right to begin. I think where we see it right now, first and foremost, is hyper-personalization. Technology, especially AI right now, is really helping brands to scale hyper-personalized approaches for their consumers, especially luxury brands. I believe there will be increasingly AI to tailor experiences, personalized product recommendations, and bespoke digital services. In the past, I think we would need a lot more manpower or staffing to make something like that happen. But technology and AI in particular is making this possible for more and more of our customers. So I would say we're now not just targeting our top 3 or 4% of our customers. We can lower that bar down to 20, 30% or more, making every customer feel a bit more valued and special. And then next, really, I would say immersive experiences as well. Something like AR, VR, it feels a bit more like a buzzword still. I think it hasn't quite broke through yet, but it will. I do think these technologies will allow customers to explore the products, but also the environments that luxury brands would like to convey. Luxury is a feeling. It's very emotional. And I think these technologies allow brands truly to communicate that feeling to the consumer. And then just last but not least, also very important, really seamless omnichannel journeys, right? Nothing breaks the feeling of luxury if there's those journeys, those channels are disjointed, online and offline. It needs to be in the background. It needs to work really well. And yeah, that's very important. And then I think something that's gaining steam and becomes more and more important is sustainability tech, especially in Europe. You might know compliance and regulations are asking for products to have a digital twin and be a digital representation. That is going to be more and more important for luxury brands as well. Here is your key to have an in with the consumer and communicate directly through the product. So exciting developments in that space.
Yeah, that's really interesting and very comprehensive. And it shows how broad-based the impact of technology is across the industry. And as you know, luxury is a little different than other types of businesses. I mean, we see digital technologies kind of impacting all sectors of the economy. But if we kind of dig a little bit into some of those unique qualities of luxury, what role do you think that technology, specifically in luxury, can play providing a better balance between both digital convenience, the sort that you kind of described, but also to help provide that exclusivity that consumers really expect from luxury products?
Yeah, I think technology is a massive opportunity, but also a risk, right? Especially in luxury, because if done wrong, you can destroy brand equity and reputation fairly quickly. And hence the bar is really high for luxury in terms of technology and digital. But I do think content is really an emotional bridge between a brand and a consumer, so storytelling through content, and that can be scaled. And also the scope can be widened through technology. In the past, was very 2D driven. Today, you have a lot more opportunities. So that emotional connection, I think the technology can help convey that from the luxury brand to the consumer is what transforms a product into a truly meaningful experience, really sets the tone for aspiration, heritage, craftsmanship that many luxury brands really, that's in their DNA. And how beautiful to use this visual storytelling and these technologies and then editorial style content, right, to elevate that perception of the brand. A huge opportunity, but with risk, obviously.
Yeah. And I love that. And it really speaks to the role of content in storytelling across channels. What role do you think content plays in building and creating those compelling, memorable customer experiences for luxury?
Yeah, again, I think we have so many different channels and opportunities today, how digital and how the different types of content can help. But I do believe Again, this is my opinion. What works best in luxury, I think, is a focus on heritage, artisanship, and values. Almost like a long form storytelling approach, that behind the scenes content, collaborate with cultural tastemakers. But above all of that, I think you have to have a narrative consistency. You have to make sure that the way your brand shows up in your strong content strategy needs to ensure that the brand's voice and story is consistent across all the channels. I think technology, again, can help tremendously here. Emotional resonance over product features. Speaking to that consumer, evoking something emotional is how you create fans, how you create loyalty. And that's what matters at the end of it. I believe some of the basics are staying the same, but your tool sets are much wider and much bigger today than they were in the past.
Yeah. And as you and I have previously discussed, content is an everywhere thing, not just a digital thing. And it requires that sort of precise approach, particularly for luxury. In your point of view, how can a strong content strategy help luxury brands tell their stories in ways that really resonate with their audiences on a deeper level?
You mean like how can they utilize that to stand out and stand above the fray?
For that
I
brand
think-
differentiation?
Yeah, it's really think hard about how you want to innovate the customer experience and also embrace your brand purpose and your cultural relevance. I think that's really critical. Authenticity, right, is really key. I think we've seen it before where luxury brands it felt like the perception I had with some of the plays that I've seen in the past with luxury brands dabbling too early in specific areas or technology areas. It wasn't brand right. It wasn't their DNA. It felt rushed. So go back to your roots, highlight unique craftsmanship, local influences, timeless identity of your brand. I think if you go back to those pillars, you can tell a beautiful story because let's look at the luxury. I think most often luxury brands already have differentiating factors that really make them who they are. And if you go back to the basics there again and you innovate based on that, and take your time. Don't rush into the next Roblox or something else without understanding what you're trying to do and convey for NFTs. I think that's critical.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'll highlight you bringing up the example of Roblox NFTs. We certainly saw a lot of cautionary examples as a lot of brands, feels like ancient history now, but really it was only a few years ago, we're rushing headlong into those. And I think to mixed results for the reasons that you identify. I wonder if I could go back to something you mentioned at the start of our conversation. That's the issue of personalization.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, in the luxury space, to what extent, is personalization now a baseline expectation for luxury consumers? I feel like maybe some time ago it was kind of a nice to have, but is it kind of a must have now? And if that's the case, or even if it's not the case, what can brands do to kind of excel in this area?
Yeah, it's absolutely table stakes today. And which is kind of scary because not everybody is really fully harnessing and embracing that space because they're trying to understand, how do I not jump in head first and make mistakes? Again, there's risk, right? There's risk that you apply a broad stroke AI approach to your customers for personalization and it goes wrong. I do think though, in general, the risk is higher for luxury brands to communicate and broadcast generic responses. The same way I think it is also becoming more risky for brands to be reactive in that space. I think there's enough data out there, even with consumers that don't share everything with you already. There's enough data out there to be proactive and predictive with today's tools versus come to me first and I'll try to figure out who you are and how to best serve you. I think there are tools out there that can do this really well. Customized storytelling, and AI with a human touch. And what I mean with that is we need to look really closely. And when I say we, it means marketing and technology leaders. We need to understand what feels like a smooth and elevated experience in AI and chatbots and when does it get clunky. And that handoff for an AI to understand at this point in 2 or 3 or 4 sentences, I will not be able to service that customer anymore. And I have to alert my human to come into the conversation early on. That is elevated customer service and that's luxury. So these are the touch points, I think, where we have to be very clear, how do we apply it? What's elevated and when?
No,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. And I think within that sort of balance of traditional clienteling with the advantages of new technologies, you can see kind of new models evolving. And just in terms of to kind of pull it back to sort of this overarching question of how luxury does storytelling, how should it do storytelling. Can you talk a little bit about how you think storytelling has evolved in the digital age, both either positively or negatively? And what are sort of the biggest opportunities for brands to connect through content? Because you could see technology as either a barrier or opportunity for storytelling.
Yeah. I think it evolved so much, right? I kind of went from broadcasting to more of a dialogue with the consumer. I think storytelling is no longer one way for the brand to talk to the consumer. Luxury brands are now engaging in conversations with their audiences. They're inviting it in. Again, in a careful way, obviously you don't want to have a Waterloo moment where someone then just in a public social media way kind of starts. We've seen a lot more, short form video, immersive formats, Instagram, TikTok stories. It has to be brand right and right for the brand DNA. User generated content, right? There's brands out there that do a phenomenal job inviting in the community and letting them share. And then there's others that say, we get it. We have fans, but our DNA is we have only key opinion leaders. So knowing all of that, when we look at Gen Z, I think there's a lot of cultural storytelling that connects with Gen Z, for example, and knowing the differences and knowing what you stand for as a brand and how you like to communicate is critical there. But I do think, obviously, in the last years, we've seen so much of the short form content, right? Immersive formats, and that's just going to grow further. The trick here will be how can you control it in a certain way so it still is, brand right and represents you versus it's going hog wild, and you're losing control.
And actually, just to throw in a question that's related to that, you talked about the importance of short form content. What do you think about luxury brands that are moving towards the opposite, towards long form, kind of even print and kind of Substack style content?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say one size fits all. I think there are brands where I would feel, look, they're now increasing their TikTok content, and I would say doesn't work for me. And then there's brands where I feel, wonderful. They're going back to the roots. It's a real example. It's not exactly luxury, but Banana Republic, right? Not luxury, but in the beginning, they were promoting their beautiful catalogs, that people cherish. They order from there that were hand drawn. It was safari wear. And so people now, they start talking about it again, like what happened to Banana Republic? Why are they not doing that again? This is an example where I know going back to your roots and reinvigorating that. And I think in that sense, in that case, it would work tremendously with an extension of some digital format that supports that. But I wouldn't think now Banana, for example, is a brand where I would say go full throttle on like a ton of short form content. I think there's multiple brands where I would say it depends on a case by case basis.
They were just kind of
that had like 20 of them and they were cherished, like she kept them and they're almost little trinkets, they're absolutely beautiful.
I remember those. So much of that, I think, targets the nature of luxury brands as kind of their own unique entities, if you will. And I'm just wondering, how do brands deal with that on a global scale? Because luxury is both local and specific as well as global and, or holistic. So I'm just wondering from your perspective, how can brands ensure that their content and their strategies are both locally relevant, but also kind of universally aligned and consistent?
Yeah. Yeah. I keep hearing about global, so a global brand voice and a local nuance, right? I think a brand needs to know on a global level, there has to be a consistent core of their brand DNA, but you also have to be able to adapt to content that reflects your local customers, right? So I think regional creative teams, for example, are critical, right? You have to have education teams that go out into the world and reiterate the global DNA and the global strategy and the global brand, but work with regional teams to make it locally relevant. I think that's still absolutely critical now more than ever. Local artisans, traditions, or influencers, we see that already online. You have these moments where something is blowing up in a pocket of the world and it works there. And it's a wonderful success for a brand and they post it and highlight it. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't then go off in New York or somewhere else. I think it makes it's part of their success and their brand DNA. And I think that's really important. And again, translating not just language, but also, cultural context and trying to figure out how do I take this global brand perspective and allow in local relevancies, into my brand. And you can do that only, I think, with regional creative teams and the global education teams that work really closely with them. And it helps you differentiate yourself as well.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, heterogeneous messaging done right reaches that consumer, right? And so, well, we could actually step back. I think a related question to that, although one might say it's a more homogenized type of force, but maybe that's an open question, is about the role of innovation in platforms. So, things like new technologies that provide more immersive experience, or AI-powered tools, depending on what one means by AI, but certainly some sort of algorithmic-based, which I would characterize as often being a black box, so that nobody could quite explain. How do you see these innovations and platforms impacting the way that luxury brands engage with their consumers?
Yeah, I think it has to match the vibe and the environment and the feeling that you get when you walk into a boutique. That's, again, very high thresholds. That's why many luxury brands develop long and develop hard before they roll something out. What really took off and helped also us during COVID is virtual try-on technology, right? Especially in makeup, when nobody wanted to touch lipstick or put something on their face and people were wearing masks. But it's sticking around because really the technology has gotten so good that the layering of the filter is you can put your finger in front of your lip and it won't overlap. It just recognizes all of that. So it's gotten so good that I think virtual boutiques and virtual try-on and so on, I think it's just a novel way for consumers to interact with luxury. And many people, and especially Gen Z, and I think it's really important to recognize that, they don't feel comfortable walking into a luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue. They see luxury more as a self-care moment versus I need to show I'm head to toe Louis Vuitton. So I feel like for them to go online and try something on or have technology at their fingertips is much more important than actually going into a store and doing this in the physical way. I think AI for styling assistants, chatbots, predictive curation, right? Someone is shopping online, you're curating a look for them. That's come a long way. And that truly is a revenue generator for brands. And in general, I think we talked about clienteling earlier, Jessica, that I feel clienteling in the past was based on how many people do you have in the store that currently have the time to really service someone individually. Well, technology will, again, lower that threshold and allow more people to be part of it. And not just here's what I would recommend for you, or here's what I put in your basket. It's also look at this wonderful content I created that is based in our brand DNA, but is Mario. It's not like I'm sending a broadcast content to someone or like a mass. I can now send content that is, there's Mario in this content. There's stuff that speaks to me there. I am actually in that content to see how these products would work and look on me. So I think that is big and that's different and going to make a huge difference in the future for consumers.
I love that. And you're really talking about the role of in personalization, keeping things, user-centric, human-centric,
Yes.
and that sort of key aspect of digital. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about digital transformation. It's an important part of luxury brand evolution and digital maturity and all of that. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, how do you balance keeping modern digital systems that keep getting products out the door and all of that, but also continue to enhance the emotional connection with customers and really build more user needs focused experiences rather than just more productized corporate ones, so that you have that balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about keeping the human emotion at the center of the digital design and whatever we roll out. Really designing for emotion, not just for efficiency. When we think about AI chatbots or curation engines, we really want to think about the journey and about the human connection. I know it's creepy at times because we feel like, wow, it's getting better and better, but we don't want a robotic kind of staccato kind of like, oh, and now this is the next phase. And now I'm pushing this on the part, you want this to be very surprised and intimate and not just streamlining transactions. I think that's very important. So amplifying the intimacy piece and not replacing it. I think that's the key, blending digital with enough human touch points, right? So that it's not just, I'm sitting here as a bystander and I'm just watching what happens on the screen in front of me, almost like it talks to me in the right moments. The engagement is at the right moments. A digital concierge, for example, that leads to a personal in-store appointment or creates a seamless and emotional curation. That's really it. More like story-driven UX and emotive content. I think that's what I would focus on for sure.
Got
And
it.
I feel like humans and consumers notice when they go on websites or they go in stores or when they engage with brands. They notice when they walk away and they're like, wow, this was delightful. This was exciting. I enjoyed this. The tech was in the background. It just helped me along versus it was intrusive. It kept nudging me or something like that. And that's first and foremost UX versus just the technology. That sometimes is overlooked alone.
No, that's wonderful. We really appreciate your time today. And thank you so much for providing your perspective on everything. It was very insightful.
Of course, my pleasure. I absolutely enjoyed it. And I think companies are doing phenomenal work already. I think sometimes I believe everybody thinks it's a race. We can't get beat by some of our competitors. I think it's important to go back to the basics and to your creative teams and your marketing teams and put in the effort, especially in luxury. It goes a long way when you come out with a compelling product versus rushing something out that will be perceived as diminishing your brand.
Yeah, really
Very
good point. It
important.
just shows that the technology is no substitute for the hard work of figuring out what your brand DNA is and how best to articulate that to your consumers. So, it just shows you that, hey, maybe, it's not a substitute solution for bringing in the human element. In fact, it probably amplifies it.
It helps us serve more and bring the brand closer to more and democratize, I think, luxury a bit more. And I think that's exciting. Absolutely.
Thank you so much again for joining us today.
My pleasure.